Welcome to the Chicamacomico Life Saving Station Historic Site. This is actually a 7-acre tract that extends all the way from Highway 12 to the Atlantic Ocean and consists of 8 historic buildings, all of which are on the National Register, all of which are original buildings. These 3 right here are outbuildings. What we now are using as the visitor center used to be the sound boat house for the rescues and the sound, so there was a smaller boat kept in there, and that's why it's on this side closest to the sound. Now it's functioning as a visitor-friendly orientation as to what the site is all about. The building on the far right used to be the stable when the government horses were here. 2-horse stable. Literally the top thing is where the hay was loaded. The horses didn't work, so later they were replaced with a tractor. That middle building was built in the 1930s, and that became the tractor shed, and then this was converted to a workshop. And then that leads us to the main complex here of the 1911 station. This is the first thing that visitors see from the road, and they don't realize how much more is behind that, because this is just merely the replacement station for the original 1874 station. So, and it's a 2-story structure with a 3rd-story watchtower, full of artifacts and exhibits and displays. And to the left is the cookhouse built for that station. So this is the 1911 historic district, and those 2 buildings are the only ones that are on their original foundation. And often we get asked, isn't this the 1911 station awfully far from the ocean? And we say, well, yes and no. It's about equidistant between the ocean and the sound because there were rescues in both bodies of water. So let's take a walk and see the rest of the site. What you see flying there is the United States Coast Guard ensign, which means it's the flag that is flown from the bow of their boats and ships, and that's the place of honor for a flag on a boat or a ship, whereas the tallest is on land, unlike at sea. We're allowed to fly that flag as an ensign on land because we're special.
Yeah, Lou, don't stand like, what are you doing? Okay, lead on.
So rather than me talk about everything that's in every room, you may want to just kind of scan and see what attracts your attention, what you want to focus on. There are a couple of things that I do want to point out as we go through them. Otherwise, I'll let you take the lead. I will say these things. This station is built in 1911, had a major modification in 1928, but as originally built, this porch was not here, and what is now functioning as our gift shop was actually the boat room. So instead of this small door, there were 2, and we'll show you a picture of it in a minute, there were 2 big bay doors here, big concrete ramp coming down here. The far wall in the gift shop would not have been there at the time, so that was all one room, and there were 2 more bay doors open on the other side. In 1928, for whatever reasons, they decided to make some serious changes, modifications. This porch was added. This was converted to a day room for the men, and most importantly, steam heat and indoor plumbing was added. So they had really arrived, but there was just still 1 bath, and the keeper had his own plumbing.
Welcome to the gift shop at Chicamacomico Life Saving Station Site. We have a lot of very unique items here. Some things you won't find in any other location, and we invite you all, of course, to please stop in, hopefully find a little something to take along with you.
We're buying stuff so you're happy.
This happens to be a particularly good example of what Linda was talking about. There are lots and lots of maps of the Outer Banks with shipwrecks, and the tourists love those. This is the only one that exists that shows all of the life-saving stations on the North Carolina coast. And we were pleased to be a part of the effort in producing this. So this is unique.
Are you looking for brown horse?
The current issue of the Island Breeze, a local publication, it focuses on the movie that was filmed here, Nights in Rodanthe, and there's several articles in there, some of which we wrote.
My mind's already creating the show in my head.
$2.05. It just never stops.
What the
The wheel
creativity-
keeps.
Yeah, the real.
I guess it's, we just have to keep going.
Well, we did win the silver, didn't we?
We had only, what, an hour, half an hour here and there in the rain?
The notebook was
Not very much.
Yeah.
And they,
Somebody-
by noon, she had said
Reading
that they
the years
already
after
had
they
2
come
inches
out,
and we're
because
going to have flash
By the
flood.
time I get to them, we don't have a library here.
Year from April.
Wow.
This is one of the more fascinating. This is called, what the room we're in now is called the men's shower. So all 8 men had this one bathroom. This, we find a lot of people do not recognize what this stuff is because you don't see it much
Cast iron.
anymore. No, it's slate.
Slate.
And if you'll come look over here, there's a really interesting story, and it shows a lot about the thinking is how different in those days. This was actually used as ballast on the barges that brought the building materials over for this building. And these are the pallet marks. The keeper was the only one that had his own office and his own bedroom. This would have been the office, the keeper's office originally.
No, I'll do it. Give me some.
That's really all I was going to talk about in this room, other than I do want to come back to this particular award over here.
Which one is that?
This right here, when we go out to the 1874 station, you're going to hear a brief version of the story of the Merlot rescue, which was headed by the keeper, John Allen Midget Jr. It became the most highly awarded maritime rescue in American history. They saved 42 out of the 51 crew of British tanker, the Merlot. All the men got awards, and Captain Johnny, which the man called him, John Allen Midget Jr., received a silver loving cup from the British government as a personal honor of their gratitude for his leadership in that role. And this has been in the Midget family for years and years and years. It still belongs to them, but they have graciously allowed us to display it. The next room over would have been the keeper's bedroom. And he was the only one that was actually allowed to live at the station. And some chose to live here, and some chose to, most of them chose to live in their own homes. But this would have been the only private room. And we're using it basically as a theater room. And think of all the boots that ran up and down these steps over the years to cause that.
Wow, yeah. Okay.
Pretty interesting. You will look at those floors, you won't see any seams in the floorboards, and that's because they were all cut to length. Anytime you do see a seam, it's because we had to replace it. Typically, you look at something like this and you think, oh well, that's just a piece of molding. But if you look on this side, you see that's not molding at all. That's all been carved as one piece. You just don't see this kind of thing anymore. Another thing you don't see is transoms, and every room has one of these transoms. And you have to remember, of course, in 1911 when this building was built, there's no air conditioning. So you can't close your door in the middle of the summer and not have some air circulation. So this is how they managed to do that. This room in the upstairs, the largest room, would have been the crew quarters. And that would have housed originally 8 men, and they would stay here in kind of bunk style, sort of like an EMS station or a volunteer fire department today. They didn't actually live here, but they would be on duty here.
Tell us how this bed would have worked over here. I mean, that's odd.
It is odd, and to tell you the truth, we don't really know. That there's a lot of gaps in our knowledge of things that we're constantly researching. There's so much to learn about the life-saving service. We do know this came from the Kill Devil Hill Station as a life-saving station, and we were told it's a bed. How it actually went together, we're not sure whether it was just a temporary cot or whether it was their form of bedding. One of the things we've yet to learn.
It looks like it probably had a piece of wood that went across in it, on top of the two
Yes,
things straight.
something would have.
Yeah, or even just the kamaki thing.
Mhm.
Yeah. Now, what would that little door have been like?
Well, the standard joke we make here is that there were so many midgets here that you had to have, the little closets. But of course, midget is a common Outer Banks surname, and it's actually an anglicized version of the original French name. Matthew Miget was the first midget in this area, and started here in Chicamacomico, and they basically spread throughout the United States. One of the most astounding statistics that I know of is that in the 1940s, the most common surname in the United States Coast Guard was midget. Not Brown or Jones or Smith, but midget in the Coast Guard. This is another very interesting artifact. There's so many stories. The brief version of this story is Rasmus Midget, who was Surfman number 1 at this station, and then later Surfman number 1 at the next station south, Gulf Shoals. In 1899, single-handedly saved 10 people from a shipwreck at great risk to his own life. The name of the ship was the Priscilla, and this is an actual door off of that ship in 1899. He got the gold medal for that award and was one of the first gold medals awarded. Now we're just using this as a display room, of course, of our station and other stations on Hatteras Island, and some of the rescues.
Okay.
This is called the superintendent's room. We're now using as a uniform and display room, medals and whatnot. But the interesting thing about this room, it shows the difference in thinking back then. In other words, this room is basically empty most of the time. But if a superintendent or any other VIP came by in those days, you had a whole room set aside for that person.
So this was like a base, no?
Well, this was one of the nicer stations and was, so that this was one place that people particularly like to stay. Superintendents, heads of departments and such. But one thing was we found the politicians particularly liked it because it's good duck hunting in the area. So they could come, stay, and do their official duties, and within practically a few steps away, then they could go duck hunting without having to
Or
go much
fishing.
or fishing.
Yeah.
So this was a particularly luscious spot for those folks.
And nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And in the next room here, we have where more of the crew would have kept their living quarters. Of course, if there were shipwreck survivors, then they took precedence over the men. They got to stay in beds and such. And then you're at the entrance to the tower, the watchtower. A lot of people call it the crow's nest.
We're using this room now as kind of the equipment display, and we'll explain all these pieces of equipment as we get out to the 1874 station, because that's where it's actually used. But before we do explain the beach apparatus drill, I think this is going to be the most helpful thing to understand what goes on with the beach apparatus drill. Because you bring a large cart, which we're going to see in the 1874 station, to the wreck pole, which simulates the mast of a ship, or the actual wreck. What we're doing here is a practice that's called the beach apparatus drill. A small gun called the Lyle gun fires a 20-pound projectile inserted into the muzzle, to which is attached a line, this line here, that comes out of this box called the faking box. That's fired at the wreck pole or the mast of the ship. Someone aboard there then retrieves that, and tied to the end of that is this V-shaped line called the whip line, which is coming off of these two reels on the cart. Once that's tied to the mast of the ship, you can tie something to one whip line, and if you pull the other one, then that goes to the ship, and vice versa, it comes back. So eventually you can set up all this equipment. This is called the breeches buoy, and it's riding on this big thick thing called the hawser. And you're simply running it out to the ship. One person gets aboard, and then you pull them back. So one at a time, they're brought to safety.
It was a particularly effective method and one that was borrowed in great part from the Brits.
Various and sundry pieces of rescue equipment used over the years. And one of the reasons the breeches buoy was such a preferred method, it was much safer for them because they never left the beach. The other method was by use of the surf boat, and I think this picture is one of the most dramatic illustrations of what they had to face. And you're going out in this, putting your life at risk in extremely violent conditions, and it's just amazing, really, when you think about
Do you
it.
have,
We've got to get that.
okay, we're ready, anytime.
Okay. You can come up. Normally there's just one. And I think one of the more interesting things about the tower is the furnishings that you see in here now. That's what it had. In other words, nothing.
I see that.
So you hear the term standing watch. Literally, that's what they did, was stand watch. And what are they watching for? Well, you're watching the ocean, you're watching the sound, you're watching ships go by. You make notes of it, and the next stations do the same thing, and so that way you're kind of keeping track of them. If something happens, you know it's between these two stations. At night, this is not going to help you at all. So what each station did was something called beach patrol, where at the hour of the watch you would send two surfmen out from the station to the beach. One goes north, one goes south, and then you meet your counterpart about halfway. You exchange beach checks, which we'll show you in just a moment, and which is one of these. Each surfman had a beach check, which showed the district number he was in, the station number, and his surfman number. So these were unique. There was only one District 6, Station 9, surfman number 1. So when I hand that to my counterpart, he hands me his. When I come back and I give that to the keeper, he knows that I did my job. And we're doing the same thing at night as we would from the watchtower. We're looking for the same kind of thing. And we'd also do beach patrols on days where there were stormy days, where the visibility is going to be low. So we're going to be out there. So in a way, the life-saving service not only did all of their job, but they did some of the job of the lighthouse service, because when they saw, when the surfmen on foot patrols saw ships in stormy conditions coming too close to shore, they would send flares up. And what they're saying is, watch out guys, you're getting close to land. Toward the sound here, in just a minute, to pan out toward the sound as well.
Okay, so why don't we let us change places with you?
What a lot of people don't realize, we were looking at the ocean, that's where most of the rescues and shipwrecks are going to take place. But we're on an island here, and we've got water on the other side too. This is the Pamlico Sound, the largest sound on the East Coast. Some people say the largest sound in the world. It is very, very shallow, and as a result of that, shipwrecks occur there too. They're generally not as life-threatening, admittedly, but if you get stuck out in the sound for days and days and days, you can dehydrate or starve to death. So there were shipwreck rescues from the sound as well, and that's another thing that the lookout had to scan for. This floor right here is an interesting little anomaly in this building. We don't get a lot of questions about it, how come that's there. But the story is that was the original floor to this tower. And when the first keeper came to inspect, he stood on this level and said, wait a minute, I can't see the sound from here. Well, the architect was the contractor was all disturbed by that and didn't want to lose money, so they made a deal that if he didn't have to take this floor out, he would raise it up another X number of feet for $72, and that was the deal they made.
Wow.
So it's still there. Okay, this is the Chicamacomico 1874 life-saving station. It was the first operational station in the state of North Carolina. It's only one of two in America that's open to the public as a museum. We're on the inside of the 1874 station now, and almost no restoration has been done, or very little has been done here. So what you see is an awful lot of the way it looked like when we inherited in 1874. This wall was recently added, and as you can tell, that does separate the equipment room from this room. This was called the day room, and I jokingly say it was their breakfast room, their lunch room, their supper room, their break room. It was the only room they had, and for many, many years. And so if you can see this lighter square that I'm standing on, this is called the ghost mark, and what that was a tin plate was on the floor that held the cook stove. So for 18 years the men lived in this building in hot Rodanthe, Hatteras Island summers with a cook stove going, and they were begging the service to give them a cookhouse, and finally in 1892 they did get a cookhouse. Through this door would be the equipment room, and this would be the heart of the station. It would house something called a surf boat, which is commonly called a lifeboat, but this was not a lifeboat. This was specifically designed for ocean rescue. This is an original 1911 B.B. McClellan, that's the brand name, the manufacturer, 26-foot surf boat that was used in the most highly awarded maritime rescue in American history. That would be the rescue of the British tanker SS Merlo, August the 16th, 1918, when 6 men from Chicamacomico Station, led by Captain John Allen Midget Jr., after a 6.5-hour ordeal, rescued 42 of the 51 sailors from the Merlo, which it was a tanker carrying over 6,500 tons of high-octane aviation fuel, torpedoed by a German submarine 7 miles offshore, right off of this station. And you can imagine the inferno that occurred when that happened. And after a 6.5-hour ordeal, our crew saved 42 of the 51. Typical boat stations would have had another surf boat hanging from the ceiling. They also would have had the other equipment you see in this room, which would consist of the beach cart, which is the large 2-wheel cart here carrying the beach apparatus. And we had talked about that means of rescue, where the cannon fires a line toward the ship. And also this funny looking thing that everybody asks us about, what is that submarine doing there? And it's difficult to describe, but that's called a life car. And basically it would take the place of the breeches buoy. Everything else would have been put in place, and on those lines going out to the ship, and instead of one person at a time coming down in the breeches buoy, you would rig the life car onto that big line and pack as many people in there as you could.
Go ahead, she's demonstrating.
The lid would have to be lifted, and there are no blankets or padding. You would pile as many adults in here as you could. Usually 7 adults could lay in here like cordwood. And someone on board the ship would then seal this vessel, this life car, this new vessel, put the clips through it while you're inside, hook this to the line, and you would be pulled to shore. The only way you could get out of this was once someone on shore then reversed the process, released the hooks, and lifted the lid. So it was a terrifying ride, but keep in mind, most people did not know how to swim back in those days. The alternative, believe me, they jumped right into this to be safe.
So this is like a fire station.
Very much so. There are a lot of similarities
That you're saving disasters at sea instead
instead of in
Correct.
of
buildings.
fire. And everybody was like on call.
That is exactly right. And they didn't live at the station, but they lived quite close to the station. These, what are called life cars, as you can see, were so bulky. It was one of those good ideas that didn't work, and it was difficult to get them to and from and use them. Therefore, they quickly fell into disfavor. As a result, these are very rare, so we're lucky to have one.
Have a look, take a minute and look around for yourself.
Yeah.
'Cause you-
You get a shot of this from the back too.
yeah.
This reminds me of what I've seen on the movies or heard of was longboats.
It had a lot in common with some of the Boston whalers type things. You notice it's pointed at both ends, it doesn't have a transom, so
Have you
it
go
goes
this way?
backwards and
Okay,
forwards.
thanks.
Originally fitted with 8 oarlocks, what the men call Armstrong powered, and then later, sometime between 1911 and 1918, and I don't know exactly when, it was retrofitted with an engine. That would be that box that's there in the middle. The men did not like the engine, as they were very weak and powerless. They actually had more speed and more maneuverability with the oars. So they routinely sabotaged the engine. It would take months for them to get. We use this beach cart, which is one of the few reproduction items we have here, to actually do the beach apparatus drill every Thursday during June, July, and August. We're only one of 2 places in the nation that performs this historic drill. And we're proud to say that our team are all active duty members of the United States Coast Guard, and we can brag and say we're the only place on the planet that Coast Guard does the old Coast Guard drill.
Sure.
Okay, this is my personal favorite view of the site. You have this beautiful ornate 1874 life-saving station. You can see all the gingerbread, most people call it. You can see the surf boat number 1046 with the doors open. And then in the background you see the beautiful 1911 station. Totally different architecture, totally different style, but they blend together so well, I think.